Hello, my name is Elena Phillip. I'm the Human Protections Analyst for the Institutional Review Board at San Jose State University. This presentation is intended to address two of the most frequently asked questions the IRB gets, which are, do I need IRB approval, and how long is it going to take? In response to the first question, I'll go over the criteria for submission of an application to the IRB and when IRB approval is needed. This is self-determined by the lead researcher or principal investigator and is dependent on whether an activity meets the definition of human subjects research. Second, I'll cover the various review types that an application can undergo when it's submitted to the IRB. Concurrently, I'll outline the approximate timelines for each type of review. Third, I'll briefly discuss some post-approval requirements that researchers are obligated to fulfill. And finally, I'll point you to some resources that are available to help researchers. So what happens when you fill out IRB documents? One of the following review processes is initiated. Either the activity is determined to be excluded from oversight altogether. The research activity can be subject to institutional oversight but deemed exempt from formal IRB review. The research may go through an expedited review process where a single IRB member evaluates the research activity, or the research undergoes a formal full review by the convened committee. In the next few slides, I'll go over the difference between these types of reviews and what the time frame is for each. Let's get started with exclusion. This process is in response to the question, do I need to get IRB approval? The two criteria that we use to determine the answer to this question are, does your work involve human subjects, and is your work considered to be research? You only have to submit an application to the IRB office if you answer yes to both of these questions. This determination is made solely by the principal investigator using an exclusion decision tool that's posted on our website. The decision tool is designed with a series of yes-no questions that follow a specific branch logic. In this sense, you can think of exclusion as a type of review. If you use the exclusion tool and determine that an application does not need to be submitted to our office, you don't need to get confirmation from our office about this decision. You keep the completed worksheet for your records and present it to any third party that may be asked about IRB approval for your activity. As a side note, student investigators may not fill out the exclusion worksheet on their own. Students are required to fill out the worksheet with the assistance of a faculty supervisor who signs the form, confirming the decision. The exclusion tool outlines the regulatory definition for human subjects and for research, and guides you to either submit an application to the IRB office or informs you that you don't need to submit an application based on your responses. Because these definitions are somewhat nuanced, and because many people tend to be confused about when they need to submit something to the IRB office, I'm going to focus on drilling down to the details of these definitions in the next few slides. So first, does your work involve human subjects? Human subjects are involved when there's an interaction with individuals that solicits personal data, when there's an intervention with individuals, and when the research team will conduct an analysis of or have access to secondary data that contain identifying information. Let's focus on some key words in each of these cases. In the first case, interaction does not mean that you have to have face-to-face contact with participants. Interaction includes remote surveys where you don't have any face-to-face contact and where you may not even know the identity of the participants. If you design an anonymous survey that will be distributed as part of the research, then the work involves human subjects because a survey is considered a tool that facilitates interaction, even if the tool may not necessarily contain identifying information. Another key word to focus on here is personal data. The research has to be about the subjects as opposed to the information that they provide. For example, if you interview a truck driver so that you can understand the basic components of a truck, that person would not be considered a human subject because the information is not about him or her. On the other hand, if you test a group of truck drivers to measure their knowledge about the basic components of a truck, those people would be considered human subjects because you're assessing their level of knowledge, their performance on a test, which is personal data. In one case, the research is about the truck, so there is no human subject involvement, even if you're interacting with individuals to get the information. And in the other case, the research is about the drivers, and they are considered human subjects. This can sometimes be confusing for researchers when they wish to survey or interview key informants. Key informants are usually asked to provide organizational or institutional information that's a matter of expertise. In this sense, key informants are proxies for information or facts and are not considered human subjects. However, researchers may sometimes veer into human subjects territory when key informants are asked to supplement the information that they provide with their personal opinions. As a rule of thumb, if people are asked about opinions, thoughts, perceptions, or their behaviors, or if you want to test someone's knowledge or performance, those individuals are considered human subjects. Human subjects are also involved when there's an intervention. A very basic definition of an intervention is a manipulation of an individual or their environment, which is done in order to observe a change in the individual. An intervention can affect a health-related outcome, a behavioral outcome, or an educational outcome for the individual. In this case, the definition of human subject applies even if no personal data is collected. So to describe a basic intervention, let's go back to the example of the truck driver. You want to know if playing music distracts truckers from concentrating on the road. You randomly assign participants who are truckers to two groups, both of which are asked to come into a simulation lab. One group of truckers is asked to drive in a simulation truck while playing music, while the other group is asked to do the simulation without music. To measure concentration on the road, you have an eye tracking monitor set up to see where participants are focusing on the screen. Here, you may not be collecting any personal information. The data are just dots on a screen. But because an intervention involves manipulating the environment or the behavior of participants, they are considered human subjects. Lastly, human subjects are involved when you access secondary data that contain identifying information. Here, you're not interacting with subjects through a tool which you've designed, but you're getting information about them through a third party. Even if you intend to de-identify the data, if you have access to identifying information to begin with, then human subjects are involved. So, for example, as part of your research involving truck drivers, you request to see the driving records of a group of truck drivers for the past year. If the records that you receive contain enough information to allow you to identify specific drivers, then those individuals are considered human subjects. Identifying information may include obvious data elements, like someone's name, but identifying information does also include data that is unique to the individual, such as a driver's license number or a truck ID for an individual trucker. To recap, an activity involves human subjects if there's interaction, intervention, or access to identifying information. Once you determine whether human subjects are involved, the next step in deciding whether IRB approval is needed is to determine whether the activity meets the regulatory definition of research. There may be numerous definitions for research, but the regulatory definition is what applies in determining whether the IRB needs to be involved in reviewing your work. Research, according to the federal regulations, means a systematic investigation designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge. This is a deceptively simple definition that needs to be unpacked in order to be fully understood. The two key phrases to examine are systematic investigation and generalizable knowledge. Let's drill down to the first key phrase. A systematic investigation means that you have a research question or questions and a methodical plan to collect and analyze data that will allow you to answer that question. A systematic approach means that you have a scaffold on which to build the study that allows for the formation of conclusions. Next, what do we mean by generalizable knowledge? If you intend to contribute the findings to further scholarly or professional knowledge, if the findings are intended to result in new theories, principles, or statements of relationships, or if the findings will be translatable to like situations, your work is probably going to contribute to generalizable knowledge. It's important to remember that most IRBs don't view generalizability as only coming out of scientific, hypothesis-driven quantitative research, in which generalizability is a matter of statistics. We interpret the concept of generalizability as also applying to the social sciences, the humanities, and education research. In these fields, researchers study how individuals interact with each other and their environment, how they understand and derive meaning from their social and cultural reality, and how they learn. In qualitative research, data may be pulled from multiple sources in order to add depth, detail, and context to explanations and inferences about human behavior and learning, with the end result being the formation of general and broad statements based on data gathered through the examination of specific circumstances. As a side note, we consider students' work towards a master's thesis or dissertation as an intent to contribute to generalizable knowledge, because the expectations established for these culminating experiences include an overall approach that's compatible with the regulatory definition of research. To sum it up as simply as possible, a systematic investigation refers to how you will get the work done, and generalizable knowledge refers to the why and the what, the intention behind the activity, and what the data you gather will ultimately be used for. Notice what hasn't been included in this overall definition of research. I haven't mentioned anything about publication. In many cases, the intention to publish or disseminate the work is a good indication that it might contribute to a larger body of knowledge, but that's not always the case. Publication is not part of the definition of research and should not be the only criteria by which you measure whether your work meets the definition of research. The other thing that's not mentioned in the definition of research is the specific methods that will be used to collect the data. I often get the question, I'm doing a simple survey, do I need to get IRB approval? I can't answer the question because the criteria that we use to determine if some kind of approval is needed rarely has anything to do with the data collection methods you're going to employ. At this point, you may be wondering if I can provide some examples to illustrate what activities meet the definition of research. Sometimes I think it's easier to understand something by what it's not. So here are some activities that are conceptually similar to research, but don't usually meet the regulatory definition of research. Quality improvement or quality assurance studies, program evaluations, usability studies. The focus of these activities is on actions that lead to improvements in specific services or products. These activities may be systematic, but they are usually not designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge. A descriptive case study, on the other hand, may not involve a systematic investigation. Case studies usually focus on a specific group or person, with the idea that the case is selected because it's representative of a broader population or issue. In this sense, the work may contribute to generalizable knowledge. But if the case is solely descriptive, then the data may not be analyzed to answer a specific research question or prove a set of hypotheses. For example, a medical case study might examine the characteristics of a patient with a unique or rare condition by collecting all the medical data on the subject and providing an all-inclusive description of the case. This approach offers easy access to a wide variety of information that can help spread knowledge about a condition in general, but there may be no analysis component to the activity. One thing to keep in mind with all of these examples is that they are not irrevocably excluded from the regulatory definition of research. In other words, you may have the intent to conduct a quality improvement study and simultaneously to use the data collected for a more generalizable purpose that does meet the regulatory definition of research. For example, many classes incorporate field work at a student's place of employment as part of the SJSU curriculum. From the employer's perspective, an employee who is also a student may be engaged in a quality improvement activity that is designed to improve the products and services that the employer provides to its clients and customers. But if the student also intends to use the data collected for a broader purpose, such as completing a doctoral dissertation, the activity may also fit into the regulatory definition of research, even if it's considered a quality improvement activity in the local context. Remember that the definition of research includes a why and what component that comes down to the specific intention of the person conducting the study. For this reason, it's important not to view the regulatory definition of research as some sort of cookie-cutter formula in which certain types of activities or approaches are excluded from IRB oversight in a wholesale manner. This is one of the reasons why IRBs don't provide blanket approvals. The consideration of whether or not the regulatory definition of research is applicable should be weighed carefully and thoughtfully for each specific project. Another example of work that may be excluded because it doesn't meet the definition of research is student work that's exclusively done for a class project where there is no intention to share the work beyond the class setting. Student work for a research methods course is classified as research practicum that's done primarily for learning purposes. Student work may also be excluded because the activity fits into one of the examples on the previous slide that are conceptually similar to research but don't quite meet the regulatory definition. As previously mentioned, the IRB office does regard work that's done for a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation to fit into the definition of research. Students must submit a complete application package to the IRB if they plan to collect data from human subjects for a thesis or dissertation. For student class projects that are excluded from IRB oversight, SJSU policy imposes some limitations. The work must be minimal risk and it may not involve a vulnerable population. So for example, children, prisoners, or people with a limited capacity to give consent are considered to be vulnerable. I'd like to conclude my discussion of exclusion by providing an example of how investigators typically approach the question of whether or not they need IRB approval. I often get emails from researchers that start out with reassurances such as, "My research is minimal risk. I'm doing an anonymous survey. I plan on collecting a bunch of information from people, but I will de-identify the data." These reassurances are then promptly followed by the question, do I need to get IRB approval? If you've been paying attention so far, then you'll be ahead of the game because it's clear that these circumstances don't actually provide any meaningful information that would allow me to answer the question. Remember, the answer depends solely on whether or not the activity meets the definition of human subjects research. And so my response to these types of questions is always the same. Are you doing a systematic investigation designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge involving either an intervention or interaction with individuals or the use of identifiable secondary data? If the answer is yes, then you must submit an application package to the IRB office for review. One of the reasons that our office does not provide a confirmation about whether or not you filled out the exclusion worksheet correctly is because that would require us to make guesses about your intentions based on yes/no responses. We don't make guesses based on the limited information that an investigator provides. You know the scope and goals of your project better than we do. If, after reading all of the information on the exclusion worksheet, you're still unsure about whether the regulatory definition applies, then you should submit an application for review. This is also communicated on the exclusion worksheet, and this is the response I provide to anyone who contacts me asking if a submission is required. When in doubt, fill it out and submit an application to our office. So let's say you've answered yes to both exclusion questions. You know your work is research and it does involve human subjects, and therefore you have to submit something to the IRB. There's a good chance that your work may be exempt from IRB review. This means that the work is subject to institutional oversight, but no formal IRB review takes place. Exemption is a term that often gets confused with exclusion and also gets used by researchers who deem their work to be exempt just because it's innocuous, implying that they don't have to do anything. Actually, exemption is a type of evaluation. It implies that the work is considered human subjects research, but that it meets certain criteria. All of these criteria must be met in order for the work to be considered exempt. The research must be minimal risk, and here the regulatory definition of minimal risk is that the probability and magnitude of harm anticipated is no greater than what participants would encounter in daily life. The research must fit into at least one of the six prescribed exemption categories. These categories are established by the federal regulations. Examples of the most commonly used categories are research with adult participants that include minimal risk surveys, interviews, or benign behavioral interventions. There is a limitation on involvement of protected groups for exempt research. You may not include prisoners at all, and children can only be included under certain narrow circumstances. We have a table of exemption categories posted on our website that shows what the requirements and limitations are for each exemption category. You can take a look at this to get a sense of whether a study may be exempt, but exempt status is not determined by the research team. It's determined by the IRB analyst upon submission of a complete protocol to the IRB office. The requirements in terms of what's submitted to our office for exempt work are as follows. Everybody fills out the same application, regardless of the type of review that the research will undergo. At SJSU, we don't use a separate application for exemption, as may be the case at other institutions. We have a checklist on our website that lists all of the documents that may be needed. In addition to the application, we require an assurance form that's signed by the faculty principal investigator, and we need the data instruments to be used. Collectively, all of the documents you submit to the IRB are called an IRB protocol. We also require some type of informed consent process to be initiated in most cases. This goes back to the idea of respect for persons covered in another presentation. If someone agrees to spend time to fill out a survey or do an interview, they should be provided with information about how the data will be used. The consent notice template on our website is the easiest way to fulfill this requirement. You provide information about the research to your participants in writing, and they keep the information for their records. Participants don't have to sign anything for most minimal risk research. Protections for participants, such as keeping confidentiality and maintaining the security of data, are still in place for exempt research. Once all of the protocol documents are submitted, the protocol is reviewed by the IRB analyst in the Office of Research, that would be me. I may request revisions and clarifications before providing you with an approval notification. The entire process usually takes about 7 to 10 business days or less. It's important to keep in mind that 80 to 85% of protocols submitted each year qualify for exemption. So chances are high that you won't need to go through a lengthy review process to move forward with your research. But you have to do your part, which means prepare all the required documents. We have a checklist on our website that's designed to help you with this, and that all the documents must be well written for a general audience. Make sure to read and follow the instructions on the application and answer the specific questions directly. These are general expectations regardless of the type of review, but it may be especially difficult to determine whether your work meets the exemption criteria if there's missing information or if the protocol is written in a way that's not comprehensible. If your research doesn't qualify for exemption, then it undergoes one of the formal IRB review processes, either an expedited review or a full review. Expedited review means that one reviewer is assigned to evaluate your protocol submission and will decide whether or not it can be approved. This is the default review process for research that's minimal risk and doesn't otherwise qualify for exemption. As with exempt research, there are prescribed review categories for expedited work. Some of the most common examples are research on individual or group characteristics or behavior, collection of biomedical samples such as blood or saliva, minimal risk clinical trials, and physiological interventions. With an expedited review, I screen the submissions and assign them to an individual reviewer. If I think your protocol will not be approved as submitted, I'll let you know what the problems are, and you'll have the opportunity to make revisions before the protocol is assigned to a reviewer. I may also identify minor revisions that you can take care of after the assigned reviewer has evaluated the protocol. Expedited reviews, on average, can take about a month to get approved. IRB reviewers are asked to evaluate protocols within 10 business days of submission, but you also have to figure in the time it takes for you to make and submit the revisions that are requested. The time frame depends a lot on the level of preparation of the protocol and how many iterations are submitted until the requests are satisfied. The IRB reviewers do have the option to select a protocol for full review, where the majority of convened committee members must decide if the work can be approved. Full review is the default review process for research that poses greater than minimal risk to participants. Unfortunately, the regulations only provide a definition for minimal risk, so there is subjectivity in determining when the greater than minimal risk threshold applies. There are also some routine medical procedures that don't fall into any of the expedited review categories and must be reviewed by the convened committee, such as when research procedures involve radiology exams like X-rays. At SJSU, full reviews tend to only happen when there's a problematic protocol under consideration that raises ethical concerns, when a researcher has made an appeal about the outcome of an expedited review, or when the researcher keeps submitting revisions that don't address previously stated concerns. In addition, any kind of invasive medical procedure automatically requires full review. Full reviews may take longer than a month because they're scheduled during IRB committee meetings. The IRB meets once a month, excluding summer and winter semesters. Regardless of the type of review your submission may undergo, please look at the common problems information on our submission help page so that you're prepared to fulfill the general expectations that we have for all protocols submitted to our office. In covering each of the review categories, I've shown the approximate timelines, but here's a recap. Assuming that everything is well prepared on your end, you can expect about a 1-week turnaround for exempt research, about a month for expedited research, and a couple months for full review research. As well, modifications, which I'm going to cover next, take about 1 week to get approved, as long as the changes don't result in a different review type, and as long as the protocol didn't originally undergo a full review. Once your protocol has been approved, there are some post-approval requirements that you need to be aware of. It's your responsibility to communicate any significant changes to our office. Examples of significant changes include a change in the number and type of subjects, changes to inclusion or exclusion criteria, changes to recruitment procedures, research methods, data instruments, consent documents, or changes to the study personnel or the study site. We have a modification request form that must be submitted for this purpose along with the revised documents. The approval notification time usually takes 7 to 10 business days or less, but you must wait until approval is granted to implement changes unless a change is needed to mitigate harm to enrolled participants. Researchers must also follow our post-approval reporting requirements. Approval doesn't expire for protocols that underwent an exempt or expedited review, but researchers are still required to submit an annual status report for record-keeping purposes. This allows the Office of Research to abide by record retention requirements. No review takes place when a status report is submitted, but if we don't hear from you after 3 years, we may delete your protocol. Continuing review is only required for full review protocols at least once a year as determined by the IRB, and you would contact me at least a month in advance to obtain the form that you need to do a continuing review. You're also required to report unanticipated problems and adverse events within 7 business days to our office. Problems can range from someone being physically injured to a laptop containing data being lost or stolen or otherwise compromised. We have a specific form on our website that should be used for reporting incidents. Before I get to my contact information, I want to end by pointing out some resources that are available to researchers to help them prepare their protocols. First, students are required to have a faculty supervisor for their research, and the faculty supervisor should be your first point of contact for developing your research and drafting your IRB application if you're a student. If you're a faculty member watching this presentation, please keep in mind the important role you play. We expect you to read the final product before it's delivered to the IRB office. You should provide guidance not only on the research design and methods, but also proofread the submission for quality of writing, consistency, and completion. Be aware that if a student submits multiple iterations of a protocol that can't be approved, we will require the faculty supervisor to intervene and resubmit on behalf of the student. Utilize the information, forms, and templates available on the SJSU IRB website. Consult the checklist posted on our website to make sure you have prepared everything that's needed. In addition to the submission help materials on our website, we have a couple of handbooks, a data management handbook, and an informed consent handbook that provide extensive information on these key topics. SJSU also provides access to a variety of research training materials through our vendor CITI. You can find courses on human subjects research depending on your discipline. Faculty researchers or supervisors are required to have completed a human subjects research course within the last 5 years when submitting a protocol or signing off on a student protocol. CITI also provides a course on human subjects research specifically for students. While we don't require students to complete the course, it is highly encouraged, and faculty supervisors may assign the course to students as part of their required learning. If you need discipline-specific guidance, you can contact one of our IRB members for your college. A link to contact info is provided on our Contact Us webpage. Finally, you can contact me. If you have any questions or concerns about the IRB process, the required materials, and the timelines, send an email to me or give me a call. Once you're ready to deliver a protocol, it should be sent to our dedicated email address, irb@sjsu.edu. So this concludes my presentation on the what and when of the IRB. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you found this information useful, and best wishes on your research endeavors.